keep in mind these three aspects that we've studied. First is the thematic aspect. Said simply, it's the ideas of the piece and the order they're in. Repetitions, contrast, restatements. And then there's the tonal aspect, which is keys and cadences. At any, when we look at the key of the piece, there's the key of the whole piece, there's the key of the section. And when we look at phrase structure, we're looking at, okay, we have identified cadences. That tells us where the phrases are, and are the phrases grouped in some way, because things that belong together form a unit. And every unit has a beginning which requires some sort of emphasis, and an ending which requires some sort of sense of arrival. Correct? So a phrase has a beginning and an end, but if the phrase is grouped with another phrase, that part also has a beginning and an end. And those beginning and endings are more important. Well, a whole section may be made up of one or more of those things, and the section has a beginning and an end, and it's even more important. Now, what you do with that isn't always an accent, right? But those are the spots where composers expect you to do special treatment, because those are spots where people know to expect something, and the composer expects you to help them prolong the intensity of something and heighten the effect of it. Am I making sense to you? But you can't do that if you don't know where you are in the piece. And, you've heard people perform and the idea that they have no clue where they are in the piece. It's just a jumble of notes. So that's what we're trying to avoid. So the first step when you take a piece is you're going to break it in 2 or 3. Sometimes pieces have more parts than that, but you're going to thematically go, okay, this hunk is a main hunk, this hunk is a main hunk, and maybe there's 3 hunks, maybe could be 5, maybe, I don't know, could be 7 in the 7-part rondo, but typically if you're just looking at something that comes to you in the normal course of your work, it's going to be probably 3 or 2 parts, right? So you break it into parts. Then you say to yourself, okay, how does this relate to that? And is it different? Is it the same? Is it repetition? Is it restatement? Then you say, what key is this part in? You have to figure out what key the part is in. Now, if it's a big piece, that part may be in a key, but it may move through other keys, right? But the question at that point is, what key is this part in? What's the most important key? Does this make sense to you? And the next step is you break the thing down into sections. In a very big piece, you may have different layers of parts and sections, but like in a moderate-sized piece, a part will divide into sections, and that may be divided into other things, or you may go straight down to phrases. Depends on how long the piece is, how complicated it is. Okay, so if you have a part of a piece, then you're going to look like, okay, how many parts does this part have? And what key are those parts in? And then you're going to go from the other direction and go, okay, where are all the cadences? Because that's going to tell me where the phrases are. Okay, now, what kind of cadence, what key am I in this cadence? And you're going to say to yourself, do any of these phrases go together to make a group? Then finally, you're going to know the beginnings and endings in the piece. Does that make sense to you? It's not really complicated. What people tend to do when they're inexperienced is they try to analyze a piece by going chord, 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 chord. Now that makes perfect sense because you've just spent 2 years being taught harmony. But what does your common sense tell you? That that's not really the way music works. There's chords, there's melodies, there's rhythm, there's texture, there's all these other things that happen in real pieces, right? So if you start trying to analyze even a 24-bar piece going chord, 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 well, if the piece is very simple harmonically, you won't learn very much at all. But if it's complicated harmonically, you won't be able to see the forest for the trees. Let's take a look at this little Tchaikovsky, The March of the Wooden Soldiers. I don't care that it's small ternary form. What I care about is how the piece works. Okay, so first, listen, really listen, maybe twice, let's do it. And your job, just listen once. The second time we listen, we're going to do the first step, which is divided into parts, right? say 2 or 3, and you're going to tell me 2 or 3, and then we'll define it specifically by measures. You got to speak. They can't see you.
3.
3. Okay. What is the first measure of the second part?
17.
Yeah.
Well, first one is
17. 17. Okay, I see you going. Why are you going like that? Is it because you can't read the numbers, or is it because it's that one, right?
Yes.
Okay. So it's that, and the third part begins in which bar?
23.
33.
Right here. Okay, so it's 33. Okay, is there a relationship between any of the two parts? Okay, tell us, Sharon.
The third part is just basically a variation of what the first part was, so it's like going A, B, A.
Okay, so you've labeled it. Okay, so the third part is a varied restatement, not repetition, because there's contrast in between. It's a varied restatement of the first part. So there's A and A prime, and in the middle there's a B. So, yeah, but why are you calling that B? I mean, if you look at 17 through 24, that's like pretty much exactly the same rhythm as measures 1 through 8. Is that why are you calling that B?
It's kind of a different tone.
It's harmonically different.
Say again?
It's harmonically different.
How?
You move to a different key.
You've moved to a different key
Or at least a different mode.
and a different mode. Those things are all true. But thematically, the rhythm's the same, but the contour is different, right? Okay. Sometimes people will worry themselves to death over, do I call it A prime A or ABA? Okay, look, it's the biggest contrast in the piece. Call it B. Okay? If you called it A prime, we would know what you meant, but what you decide to say about a piece is how you decided to understand it. So if your emphasis is on how similar the parts are, you could go A prime, A double prime. But it doesn't really feel like that as a whole. It feels like you do something, you go away, and you come back, right? So to do A prime, A double prime is to say that there's no real contrast. It's just a set of variations, and it does not feel that way. Okay, now let's talk about the keys of the sections. What is the key of the first section?
D.
Second?
D major.
D major. How do you explain the cadence on A in bar 16?
The first section just ends on a half cadence.
Say again?
First section just ends on a half cadence.
Okay, you could interpret that as the first section is in D and ends on a half cadence, or you could say it's in D and it modulates to A. You could say that. Okay. The third section, since it's parallel, let's take a look at that. That one's very clearly in D major, right? Starts and ends in D major. So the A sections we associate with the tonic key. The tonic is D major. So if we were just drawing a big schematic, we'd go, first part is A in the tonic. Third part is A prime in the tonic, right? Okay, what key is this B in? Well, if you buy a puppy and you want to know what kind, you look at the end, not the beginning. So look at the end of the section, that's measure 32.
It'd just be D minor?
32, well, no, let's look at 32 first. I mean, I agree with that assessment here, but what's the end? Is it a boy puppy or a girl puppy? What key? It ends in A. So the goal of the section is A. A is the dominant. So that's where it's headed. So you could say the B section is in the dominant. And I'm talking in the most general terms, right? However, someone correctly noticed that it starts off sounding like D minor. Because you have, in measure 18, you have B flat, which is lay, and you have F natural, which is may. And what's happening is the composer is sort of, he gets you to the dominant chord at the end of the first section, and by putting it in D minor, it still sounds like a 5. Right? The A still sounds like a 5. That B flat makes you think, okay, I'm going from lay to so. But before long, in the next part of this little section, we end up having a motion to A complete with G sharps and B naturals. Right? So if I had to answer the question, what are the main sections, what are their keys, I would say 1 through 16 is A, it's in the tonic. 17 through 32, am I adding right? 17 to 32 is B, and it's in the dominant. And then I would say A prime is 33 to the end, and it's in the tonic. And I'm leaving a lot of details out. Okay, so let's see. What did I do on the next slide? Oh, look, there it is. Can you read that? So here's the A section, tonic moving to dominant, B section is the dominant, and A prime is the tonic. So that's what we've just done. So, you assign your piano student, learn 1 through 16. Right? Not 1 through 12, not 1 through 11. Something that makes musical sense, correct? All right, so the next step is we do the same thing for each section, right? We divide it into parts. So let's listen again and see if we can divide that. I'm going to play the whole thing, but what I'm asking you to do is see if each part divides into 2s or 3s or whatever. Casey, what do you think? First section, the first part, how many sections in there?
2.
Okay, where would you start the second part? Second section. I'm going to get part and section mixed up a lot. But for the purposes of your brain, part is the biggest one. Sections are smaller.
On measure 9.
Yes, so the first part divides into 2 sections, 1 through 8, and then 10 through 16. And 1 through 8 is all in the tonic. 10 through 16 starts in the tonic, or 9 through 16 starts in the tonic. Did I say 10 before? 9. 9 through 16 starts in the tonic and ends on the dominant. We'll worry about whether it's a modulation or just a half cadence in a minute. What are the relationships between the 2 sections of this part? What do you think? What I mean, thematically.
Well, both on 8 and 16, both end on the same cadence. Or not cadence, just note in general.
Okay, if you were teaching somebody to sing this by ear, you'd teach them the first 8 measures, right? And then you would say, the next part,
Repeat that.
Starts just like this, but with a different ending, right? It's like it's not necessarily complicated. Okay, it's actually very practical. So that's all the stuff that you know in your head that you don't tell everybody you're leading, right? So you divide it up like that, and the way you would approach it would be the similarities are. So this part is made up of two sections that are thematically similar. They begin alike. They begin exactly alike, and they end differently, right? Okay, so in the second part, do we have divisions? Do we have sections? See? Okay, talk, Robert.
It looks like there's a section, like there's two sections particularly between 17 and 24 it looks like, and then it sort of does like a very repetition thing from 25 to 32.
Okay, so it's the same relationship.
Yeah.
Okay. And then the third section is parallel to the second section. You know, two sections. Each part has two sections, and the two sections are 8 bars long, and they, inside each part, the sections are melodically related. Does that make sense to you? Okay. All right, so let's see if I got that right when I did my homework. I did! Look at that. Okay, so I got part A, section 1 in the tonic, part A, section 2 in the tonic moved to the dominant, part B, section 1 in the dominant, part B, section 2 in the dominant, and then part A, section 1 and 2 both in the tonic. This is clear as a bell, right? So now you have A, 1 and 2, B, 1 and 2, A prime 1 and 2. Tonic, moving to dominant, 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 tonic, tonic. First, we listen. This might or might not be Bach. Parts? Two parts. Do we agree? And he kind of made it sort of easy for us because he repeated each part, which is a pretty clear way of saying, I want these things to belong together more than they belong to the other stuff, right? Okay, so that was easy enough. What is the tonal structure of the first part? Starts in, ends in.
Tonic.
Talk louder.
It starts tonic, ends in tonic.
Starts in the tonic and ends in the tonic. What's the tonic?
G minor.
G minor. Okay, so it starts in G minor, but it ends here. Bar 16 is a B flat major chord. So it starts in the tonic and ends in the relative major. So the first part moves from 1 2, 3. Does it have subsections? Okay, so how many bars in the first section of the first part? 8. Okay, so we have an arrival at bar 8, and then 9 through 16 is a unit. Okay, is there a relationship between the big parts? Like, is there repetition from here to here? Okay, where's the repetition?
It's rhythmic repetition, just even on the introduction, like the first
measures of protocols.
This right here?
It's the second part of the first,
Oh, okay, yeah, so there's a relationship. Okay, but it's the relationship is there, and it's an important thing because he's making two different things sound connected in a way, but because it's not lying in the same part of the phrase, I wouldn't call that a repetition. I would call that a motivic relationship. It's a motivic relationship, but not a repetition or a restatement. Does that make sense? At least not of a phrase. So if you were talking to a 12-year-old about this, you would probably first say the first part and the second part are alike, different. Different. So this is A, B, right? And then if you were talking to an advanced flute student, you would point out the motivic repetitions, and maybe you would decide to articulate those figures the same way. Okay? Possibly. Now, inside the first part, are the sections related? How, Libby?
They start the same.
They start the same, but they end differently. And so there's a parallelism between the two sections within the first part. How about in the second part? Are there sections in the second part? Okay, where would you make an ending of the 24? So this turns out this is at the end of part 2, section 1, right? And that would make this part 2, section 2. And again, there's contrast here. So there's a parallelism here and there's contrast here. Okay, let me see how far I can go and catch up with us. Okay, we did that. We did that, right? Except for the keys. Now, when I say tonic to dominant, I don't necessarily mean it modulates the dominant. What I mean is it starts on the tonic and you have a cadence on the dominant. We have to figure out how we feel about that cadence in a little while. This clearly starts in G minor and ends in B flat major. This actually is in B flat major, starts and ends in it. And this is kind of strange, isn't it? You got this G major chord here, but boom, you end up in G minor.